Tonight on TV2's Election Edition, we have updates on all of the Ohio races and issues that matter most to you.
Kent State students voted today at various polling locations, including the Recreation and Wellness Center. TV2 spoke to voters on why they cast their ballots.
To vote or not to vote, students on campus share their opinions on this year's midterm and if they hit the polls. All these stories and more on today's election night of TV2 News. Good evening, Portage County, and thank you so much for joining us this election night. I'm Olivia Sharp.
And I'm Sydney Brown.
We will start our election night coverage with Matt Mergen, who's got a story for us. Matt?
That's right, guys. I went to the polls today and I interviewed several students about why they cast their ballot. Kent State students exercised their right to vote today at the Wellness Center located right here on campus.
I think it's very important to use your right to vote. This is like deciding on the decisions that are made about your life, so I feel like it's very important.
I came to vote mostly because I was excited because it's my first time voting, and I think that I should really, since I have the opportunity and it was given to me by people before me, I should really take advantage of it.
We're the future, so what we vote on today will matter tomorrow and going forward, so it's important to voice your opinion, and this is the way to do it.
Several issues were present on the ballot, but to many students, certain ones stood out above the rest.
I think it was really important to vote on issue 1 because I think you do need to take in consideration the reasons behind the case and your background, and like they said, like the likelihood of coming back, and with all of those different decisions, I think it's important to take into consideration like each individual person.
The Senate is very important, who we vote for there, as well as governor and attorney general in both issues 1, 2, and 17.
The Senate, the House, the governor, and the issues that were on the ballot.
Personally, I think lowering the misdemeanor for marijuana was one for me that I thought was very important because there are a lot of people behind bars that should not be. So that was my big one today.
Students believe it is important for young voices to be heard.
It's important to vote, to express how you feel people should be treated in this country and what decisions should be made regarding your own individual self.
You want to make change, you have to actively work towards that. If there's issues that are important to you, again, come on out and vote. It really can't hurt. All it does is help and promote change. So I would say that's why it's very important.
TV2 will continue to update you on the results of today's voting. Reporting from the Franklin Hall studio, I'm Matt Mergen.
Thank you so much, Matt. Many students had to vote using provisional ballots today, especially those who are registered to vote in a different county but live in Portage County for school. This process is used for poll workers to ensure voters did not vote more than once. Voters just had to bring a form of identification and proof of residency in Portage County. Every voter who opted for a provisional ballot received this informational sheet showing how to check on their ballot. The hotline is available until December 31st for voters to call in and ensure their ballot is counted. And if the Board of Election needs more information, you can call the line at 866-OHIO-VOTE. The Portage County ballot had a lot of candidates to consider. As results start to come in for this midterm election, we will detail who occupies each seat.
Portage County has 4 local positions to be filled in addition to the state and federal candidates.
This midterm election, there are a handful of open seats. First and foremost, we've got the Ohio governor election that is very highly contested. Republican candidate Mike DeWine is the incumbent, facing off against the Democratic candidate Nan Whaley.
Next up, we have the Ohio Attorney General. The incumbent is David Yost, who is the Republican candidate, and the Democratic candidate, Jeffrey A. Crossman, as the Democratic.
We now look at the Ohio Auditor of State. Keith Faber is the Republican candidate, and Taylor Sappington is the Democratic candidate.
Ohio Secretary of State Frank LaRose is the Republican candidate. Independent Therese Tor Maras and Democratic candidate Chelsea Clark.
Ohio Treasurer of State Robert Sprague, the Republican candidate, facing off against Scott Schertzer, the Democratic candidate.
Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, we have Republican Sharon L. Kennedy and Democrat Jennifer Brunner.
For Justice of the Supreme Court, Pat Fisher, the Republican candidate, is facing off against Harry Jameson, the Democratic candidate.
In addition, we have Republican Pat DeWine facing off against Democrat Marilyn Zayas.
U.S. Senator, possibly the most highly contested race on this ballot, J.D. Vance, is a Republican candidate who is a former Marine and businessman against Democratic candidate Tim Ryan, who has represented Ohio's 13th congressional district since 2013, both vying for Rob Portman's seat.
Representative to Congress, we have Republican David P. Joyce and Democrat Matt Kilboy, who is, I believe, a former Flash.
State Representative Republican Gail Pavliga is facing off against Kathleen Clyde. Kathleen Clyde was just in Kent yesterday.
Judge of the Court of Appeals, we have Republican Eugene A. Lukey and Democrat Thomas R. Wright.
Judge of the Court of Appeals, that is Republican John J. Eklund. As you can see, ladies and gentlemen, he is running unopposed.
For County Commissioner in Portage County, we have Republican Mike Tillin and Democrat Jared Dine Hayes Nelson.
County Auditor is Republican Matt Kelly facing off against Democrat Brad Cromes.
Member of State Board of Education, we have Robert R. Fulton and John P. Hagan.
For Judge of the Court of Common Pleas, Wesley Buchanan is facing off against Lori J. Pittman.
In addition, we have Paula C. Gilton. For the Judge of the Court of Appeals. All right, next up we have the votes are being counted, and we are just as the polls just closed. The Secretary of State, Frank LaRose, detailed the counting process that extended beyond the voting hours. Polling workers arrived at 5 a.m. this morning to get set up and have to wait till the last person in line leaves after 7:30 to start the count. Absentee ballots and early votes are recorded first, then they move to count the votes from Ohio's 4,000 poll locations.
The Washington Examiner has released data regarding what issues Ohio voters have found most important based on web searches. Education leads Ohio voter priorities and has only dropped below the #1 spot a handful of times to crime and taxes. Ohio residents have seen inflation and abortion as the least important issues, with both being researched minimally. Kent State students went out to vote and they were willing to share their opinions about the midterms.
Our reporter Kennedy Gotham spoke to students about their views.
Each midterm election, there are big political issues that can sway the results, and this year is no exception.
At the behest of one man, Donald Trump, has taken this country in a very wrong direction on women's rights, on civil rights, on marriage equality, on income, on union rights.
With the overturning of Roe versus Wade and new bills on the ballot, there is a lot weighing on this election.
Elections really are, they're not so much liberal, conservative, middle of the road, Democrat, Republican. They're whose side are you on? And if you care about finding ways to help young people with student debt, if you care about climate change, if you care about gun safety, if you care about women's rights and abortion rights, you can find out easily who's on your side.
Kent State students are also talking about these issues and educating one another on the importance of casting their vote.
We've done a lot of voter registration, and we did a Flashes Votes Festival to kind of just take away some of the myths about voting.
Kent State adjunct professor surveyed his class of 55 students to see what issues they cared about.
They just responded like top 5 issues, or when you're going to vote in this midterm election, what matters to you.
Students took the poll anonymously on a 0 to 5 scale, 0 being least interested and 5 being the most interested. Gun policies was the issue students were most concerned about.
Obviously not scientific, not randomized, but anonymous responses to all the policies. They think the top 5 policies that are going to matter.
Reporting for TV2 News, I'm Kennedy Gotham.
Coming into Election Day, there were over 39 million early votes, according to the United States Elections Project. The polls show among all registered voters, congressional preference is tied with 47%. However, among likely voters, 48% prefer a Democratic-controlled Congress. Also, there was no gap on enthusiasm for these elections. An identical 73% of Democrats and Republicans expressed the high interest this year. After the overturn of Roe v. Wade, the topic of abortion making its way onto ballots across the country. We'll tell you how Ohio could be impacted.
TV2 reporter Chris Abreu will be covering today's events in the Ohio Senate race, what they have from Columbus and Boardman.
This show is sponsored by Portage Community Bank.
Our community, we take care of one another. When your dreams are big, we know it's important the advice is sound and decisions are made locally. When your time is of the essence, we understand you need life at your fingertips. When you invest in the future, we want your nearest and dearest to feel secure. We are neighbors serving neighbors. That's why you worry less and enjoy the everyday moments. Portage Community Bank. When you grow, we grow right along with you.
Welcome back. We will continue our election night coverage with an inside look at why so many people decided to vote early.
Our reporter Jacob Brooks spoke to city officials about the issue. Jacob?
So we are right outside the Portage County Board of Elections, where for the past 10 or 15 minutes or so, there have been a bunch of cars pulling up South Meridian Street, and the ballots have been coming in. There's actually another round coming in right now. You guys are going to see it in just a second. So they're bringing in the ballots that were counted, also other voting election information they had today. So this is, each precinct has like a whole system they're going to have. So the blue box is where the ballots are coming in right now. That's from the Wyndham voting precinct. So if you didn't vote today, a lot of people voted early this year. In fact, record numbers. So I talked with Terry Nelson. She's the deputy director of the Board of Elections here in Portage County, and she explained why so many people are voting early this year. The numbers are in, and they show more people are voting early in Portage County.
People can vote at their convenience. They're making a plan to vote. We don't want people, if they wake up in the morning on election day and they don't feel good, we don't want them going to the polls. So they've already, hopefully they've already voted.
As of Monday afternoon, Portage County had 6,138 people vote early in their office, and they've mailed 13,775 absentee ballots. She expected more people to vote over the weekend.
People are procrastinators they just are. So we'll be busier probably Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then Monday.
For the most part, they haven't had any big lines during early voting, a much different story than the general election in 2020.
We had a ton of people waiting in line. Like they were waiting in the freezing rain, and it was crazy. But this election, we haven't had lines more than 10 or 15 minutes.
Some people vote early because they're worried about COVID, or they want to avoid the lines on election day, or they just want a break.
That way they can turn it off. Like they don't have to listen to the ads or read the paper or do it. They're done. They've done their duty and they don't have to worry about it anymore.
Nielsen says it's important for people to educate themselves about the candidates and the issues.
There are so many races that are going to be so pivotal in the future of Ohio on this ballot. Not just the governor, but the Supreme Court races are huge. Those are the people who are going to be making decisions on some of the hot button issues that people are talking about.
Jacob, you talked about the early voting numbers in Portage County. What about across the state?
Yeah, so we got new numbers last night from the Secretary of State's office, and they said that as of 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon, 1.5 million people across all of Ohio voted early. That is up 3.9% from the 2018 midterms, which was a record. So they broke the record that was set 4 years ago. What's interesting here with the numbers is the number of requests for absentee ballots dropped. They said the big increase overall comes from early in-person voting like people have been doing here in Portage County. They said there was about 120,000 more early in-person voters in all across Ohio than there were in 2018. And so all in all, you filter all those numbers down, 6% more people have voted at this point than they did in 2018, guys.
So that is statewide. How do Portage County numbers compare to others in Northeast Ohio?
Yeah, so this is interesting. These numbers are from last Tuesday, a week before the election. So we're going to start with Cuyahoga County, that's Cleveland area. It's mixed. So they had less ballot requests in 2022 than they did in 2018 as of a week before the election, but they had more ballots returned. So they had 154,000 requested with 90,000 returned in 2022. In Summit County, which is just to the west of Portage County, that's where Akron is, they had a slight increase. They had both more ballots requested and returned in 2022. They had 60,000 requested with 38,000 returned. Remember, this is a week before the election, so last Tuesday. And then compare that to 2018, where Summit had 57,000 requested with 31.8 thousand returned. So then Trumbull County, which is just to the east of us, borders Pennsylvania, they had more ballots requested and returned in 2022, like Summit County. So they had 22.8 thousand requested in 2022 with 15,000 returned. Compare that to 2018, 18,000 requested with 11.4 thousand returned, guys.
When is the earliest we can expect the results from Portage County, Jacob?
Very, very soon. As you can see behind me, the ballots have been starting to come in. They have been coming in for about 10 or 15 minutes now. They said we should get the first results right around 8:30, and they'll be dropping them periodically throughout the night.
Jacob Brooks starting our coverage for us in Ravenna. Thank you so much, Jacob. Tim Ryan and Nan Whaley came to Kent in the final hours of campaigning.
Whaley came to campus to speak with students, and Tim, he was at a local park where I spoke to Democratic candidates. The Kent community was joined by Democratic candidates running for office, and they had a message for young voters.
I think this election is going to be decided by young people and by women. We've seen an enormous number of registered voters on Kent State, so it was important for me to get here. And, we're excited to be one of the last stops on the campaign here at Kent State.
What we're seeing on voter registration with young people on college campuses, I think we have over 1,000 at Kent State. So young people are engaged, and, they want somebody who's going to support the democracy and support their rights, and that's me.
They emphasized and shared their concerns for the state.
For the first time in this country's history, rights are taken away like they were for women. And, we have issues of climate, we have issues of what's the job market look like for young people.
So, protecting rights is the first thing I do, and then get to work of raising the wage, protecting our climate, making sure our environment, and making sure that young people want to stay in the state.
The Democratic candidates were also there to address pressing topics.
The state is really on a cliff, and it's making a big decision tomorrow about what kind of state it's going to be. Is it going to be a state that protects abortion rights? Is it going to be a state that makes college affordable? Is it going to be a state that, does something around gun safety? And right now, if we go the same direction, we're going to fall right off of that cliff and say no to all of those things. So we definitely need a change to make sure those things happen. And those are things that really, I think young voters really care about.
Whaley and the Democratic Party encourage the community to go vote.
Yeah, talk to your friends, make sure they vote, because it is going to be a turnout election. It's going to be closer than people think, and we need everyone to vote. We don't want to be talking on Wednesday about what if we had called people, what if we had asked folks what their plan was to vote, what if we had gotten people to rides to the polls. It's now or never time. You got to vote.
Hey, just get out there. Even if you disagree with me, please go vote. It is really important for young people to vote.
So how does Tim Ryan feel about some of the bigger issues facing voters? For issue 2, Ryan is a yes. That issue would ban non-citizens from voting in Ohio elections. That's already illegal for state and federal elections. Ryan says this would clarify that non-citizens also can't vote in local elections. We don't know which way he'll vote on issue 1. That relates to bail reform. He did say on Fox News recently that he supports making sure judges have the right to balance their decision with regard to public safety.
Abortion continues to be a hot-button topic in Ohio. TV2's Elijah Chaffin takes a close look at Tim Ryan's stance on abortion as pro-choice and more topics throughout Ohio.
Thanks, Sydney. Ryan touched on keeping the ban of late-term abortion in Ohio. With his opinion of keeping the ban, he stressed that he wanted to solidify Roe v. Wade. He then told the stories of the women who had to travel out of Ohio to get an abortion. One of Ryan's big ticket issues is abortion access. A hot topic among voters all over the country is abortion, but in Ohio, the decision over 3 seats in the Ohio State Supreme Court could determine how it swings. After Roe v. Wade was overturned, Ohio implemented a ban on abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy. While the ban is blocked in a lower court currently, it will eventually end up in the state Supreme Court, meaning that the election of the judges might determine how the court will swing towards this issue and if the ban will be intact or removed. Cleveland doctor said that when the Ohio abortion effect was in effect, there was a variety of problems. In an interview with the Ohio Capitol Journal, Dr. David Birkin says the consequence of the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade has been chaos for both patients and doctors. He says he had a criminal attorney to help guide him through the new restrictions. He also said doctors are worried about performing abortions even in emergencies, so some women may not get the care they need. Election returns are coming in as we speak, so we will have to wait until later tonight to see what happens. For TV2, I'm Elijah Chaffin.
Thanks, Elijah. Abortion is not only on voters' minds, but also Ohio. But it continues to polarize Americans across the country.
I spoke to Denise Leopold, a board member from Right to Life, and Cassie Kirby, the director of the Women's Center here in Kent, about this midterm and how it could impact the state of abortion in Ohio and across the nation. One of the main campaign issues in this year's election has been abortion. Where candidates stand on this issue is very important to many college students following the overturning of Roe versus Wade.
As we've seen with this, the overturning of Roe versus Wade is not just one thing that suddenly happened out of thin air. It was a lot of people being in places where decisions were being made. And so it's imperative that every time you vote, you think about what those people represent, what their values are, how they vote, because that makes a difference in the long run.
The Dobbs decision has not only become a hot-button issue, it's also driven an increase in the number of women voters. This year, there has been a 500% increase in registered female voters.
And they made some of that connection based on the Dobbs decision over the summer. So I do think there is a little bit of wait, if I don't weigh in on these things, people are going to make decisions without my participation. So I better weigh into what I think is important.
However, not everyone sees abortion as the biggest issue on the ballot. Pro-life organizations believe the focus should be elsewhere.
Education, some of the things that are happening in our schools with the CRT and everything else, it's placing an undue burden on our kids. We're not letting our kids be kids. That and so many other liberal issues that are being brought up that are saying they're so important.
Regardless of party lines, both sides have similar advice when it comes to voting.
And you may feel like your voice doesn't make a difference or your vote doesn't make a difference, but collectively it does. And so it's really important that this is not just a right, it's a responsibility. And people fought hard for this. So definitely get out there and make sure your voice is heard.
So it's not black and white. And I know that everybody's pitting red against blue, blue against red, and who's crooked on this side. And I'm sure there's mistakes on all sides, but you have to look at what the candidate stands for and what the party platforms are.
Reporting for TV2 News, I'm Olivia Sharp.
Nice reporting there, but a 500% increase in women voters is impressive, but what can we expect for the registration here in Kent?
Well, in speaking with Cassie Kirby, she mentioned that the League of Women Voters was out on campus several times throughout the semester, encouraging everyone to vote as well as offering resources to potential voters. Undergraduate Student Government has also held several events encouraging Kent students to register and teaching them the importance of voting.
And Denise Leopold from Right to Life mentioned that they are mostly concerned with issue of education on the ballot. And what other issues do you consider pressing?
Besides education, Leopold also mentioned that the economy was a big concern, as well as inflation issues that dated back to the Trump administration and beyond. Switching gears, experts say to be mindful of how this election may impact your mental health. Politics can bring stress and worry.
But there are ways to overcome those feelings. In today's Health Minute, Mandy Gaither has more on how to ease election anxiety.
Differing beliefs, long lines at the polls, concerns over outcomes.
Election stress, like other stressors,
have significant negative physical and emotional consequences.
Cleveland Clinic psychologist Susan Abreu says some signs of stress include trouble sleeping, loss of appetite, upset stomach, sweating, and excessive worry.
All of these things indicate that your emotional system may be on overdrive.
To overcome those feelings, Abreu says avoid catastrophizing when your mind jumps to the worst case scenario for your side.
Political ads are the epitome of this. It convinces us that if we vote for candidate X, disaster will happen. This seeps into our subconscious and replays over and over again. So stay in the present.
Focus on routine, healthy eating, and sleeping. Abreu says that can help our bodies be ready for the next day, no matter what happens at the polls, and be mindful of when, where, and with whom you have political conversations.
Those conflicts, arguments, disagreements, that can make your stress response skyrocket. On the other hand, those open, fruitful discussions can make us feel really soothed and validated.
If things get heated, Abreu says step away.
If conflict is about to erupt, it is okay to state your feeling and create a boundary. Say, that's a really important thought, but this is not the time or place to talk about it.
For Health Minute, I'm Mandy Gaither.
Well, polls closed a little bit over an hour ago. The results are starting to roll in. As we mentioned, the incumbent Republican candidate for Governor, Mike DeWine, the vote 53.59% for him. And Nan Whaley is keeping this race close. However, she's the Democratic candidate. She has 46.41% of the votes.
Moving to Ohio Attorney General, the incumbent David Yost as the Republican is at 49.93%, while Democrat Jeffrey A. Crossman is at 50.07%, a tough race so far.
We look at Ohio Auditor's state, that Republican candidate Keith Faber trailing behind Taylor Sappington. Faber currently has 48.37% of the vote. Sappington has a small lead of 51.63%.
For Ohio Secretary of State, we have Frank LaRose at 49.57%, and he is running for re-election as a Republican. And we have Democrat Chelsea Clark, who is coming in at 49.68%, and our independent candidate Teresa Tormaras at 0.75%.
For Ohio Treasurer of State, the Republican Robert Sprague trailing behind Democrat Scott Schertzer. Robert Sprague has 48.21% of the votes, and Scott Schertzer has 51.79% of the votes thus far.
Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, we have Republican candidate Sharon L. Kennedy at 45.68% and Democratic candidate Jennifer Brunner at 54.32%.
Justice of the Supreme Court, Republican candidate Pat Fisher falling behind Democrat candidate Terry Jamison. Jamison has 53.61% of the votes. Pat Fisher has 46.39% of those votes.
Also for Justice of the Supreme Court, we have Pat DeWine for the Republican candidate at 46.18%, and he is falling behind Democratic candidate Marilyn Zayas at 53.82%.
For U.S. Senator, this is the race to watch, folks. Thus far, the Republican J.D. Vance is behind Democrat Tim Ryan. I expect this race to be back and forth all evening, but for right now, J.D. Vance has 44.35% of the votes counted. Tim Ryan has 55.65% of the votes counted.
And representative to Congress, we have Republican candidate David P. Joyce at 51.69%, and he is right above the Democratic candidate Matt Kilboy at 48.31%. The Waterloo School District is once again asking for funding on this year's ballot. How community members are reacting to the 1.5% income tax.
With some Gen Zers turning 18, one more generation is being added to the midterms voting population. TV2 reporters break down the issues that matter most to different generations when we return.
This show is sponsored by Portage Community Bank.
We take care of one another. When your dreams are big, we know it's important the advice is sound and decisions are made locally. When your time is of the essence, we understand you need life at your fingertips. When you invest in the future, we want your nearest and dearest to feel secure. We are neighbors serving neighbors. That's why you worry less and enjoy the everyday moments. Portage Community Bank. When you grow, we grow right along with you.
Tim Ryan, the Democratic Senate candidate, has been touring around Ohio ahead of the election today, even stopping by Kent State's campus earlier today.
He spoke on campus with supporters at the Recreation and Wellness Center. Let's now go to Chris Abreu, who is live at the Ryan's campaign in Boardman.
So, Chris, there are a lot of eyes on this race for a lot of different reasons. What's going on?
Thanks, guys. I'm currently here in Boardman, Ohio, where Senate Democratic candidate Tim Ryan has officially kicked off his watch party ahead of election results later on tonight. Now, so far it's included a couple performances from his different supporters, and they also have been updating the group as ballots continue to be counted. Now, Ryan has been on the campaign trail for the past couple days now, even visiting Kent State University just earlier today. He spoke with students and explained why student voters are more likely to vote for him rather than his competitor, J.D. Vance.
And it sounds like the turnout has been super high here, and that's great. But I think the issue of Roe v. Wade and abortion rights, my opponent's an extremist on those issues, and I'm a protector of those freedoms for women.
Ryan said student voters had a bigger turnout than usual this year. He emphasized the importance of students and young people in improving society.
It starts with people here. We need nurses, we need teachers, we need police officers. We need people to help rebuild our society, and I can't think of anything better than young people being committed to that.
He also talked about his plans for this election evening, and he expressed a lot of confidence that he will be taking home the Senate seat later on tonight.
I think we got one more stop, and then I'm going to go home and shave and clean up and go to our party tonight and watch the returns, and then we're going to win, and then I'm going to have a cocktail.
Now make sure you stick with us because I'll be here all night as ballots continue to be counted. Reporting live in Boardman, I'm Chris Abreu. Back to you guys at the desk.
Thank you so much, Chris. Governor Mike DeWine supported J.D. Vance at a rally Monday night. DeWine announced last week that he would be attending this rally alongside Donald Trump. This marked the first time in a few years that DeWine attended a Trump event. DeWine said he wanted to support Vance and encourage people to get out and vote.
Mike DeWine and Nan Whaley are facing off in the race for Ohio governor. One issue that is at the top of discussion is gun rights. While both candidates used to agree on that issue, that's not the case anymore. DeWine has loosened gun restrictions, while Whaley believes in more restrictions. Abortion rights and the pandemic have also become a topic between the two candidates.
We now shift to new information regarding former President Trump and his opinion on this year's midterm election.
TV2's correspondent Jalen at Bankston has the updates. Hi, Jalen.
Olivia, Sydney, that's right. Former President Donald Trump has been showing up his support for the candidates of his party throughout these elections. Former President Trump repeatedly urged people on Monday to vote for J.D. Vance at a Dayton rally. Trump gave his support to Vance, calling him an independent voice for Ohio. Additionally, current Governor Mike DeWine briefly came to the stage in support of Vance. However, just last week, Trump humiliated Vance at a rally, saying Vance sucks up to him because he wants his support.
There's only one choice to end this madness. If you support the decline and fall of America, then you must, absolutely must, vote for the radical left crazy people, the radical left Democrats. And if you want to stop the destruction of our country and save the American dream, then tomorrow you must vote Republican in a giant red wave that we've all been hearing about.
Former President Trump repeatedly urged people on Monday to vote for J.D. Vance at a Dayton rally. Trump gave his support to Vance, calling him an independent voice for Ohio. Additionally, current Governor Mike DeWine briefly came to the stage in support of Vance. However, just last week, Trump humiliated Vance at a rally, saying Vance sucks to him because he wants his support. It may be election night 2022, but former President Donald Trump is already looking towards the 2024 election. Trump is reportedly preparing to announce a presidential bid later this month. That's according to two close sources to the president. At a campaign event in Dayton last night, Trump said he'll be making an announcement at Mar-a-Lago next Tuesday. Top advisors have been told that Trump is going to make his declaration in a battleground state that he closely lost to then candidate Joe Biden in 2020. But others say Trump should stay put and make his statement in the Sunshine State, where he has strong support from GOP voters. A Trump spokesperson declined to comment on the matter.
What I will say about this is Donald Trump cannot be president again. The American people know it. You see it in his numbers. And in part because he has continued to push candidates. This election is, again, about democracy, and it is about moving our country forward and not back to the chaos of Donald Trump.
According to a source, an advisor to former President Donald Trump testified Thursday in front of a grand jury looking into how some of the government records made it to Mar-a-Lago. Kash Patel was ordered to appear by a federal judge and was granted immunity from prosecution for his testimony. The court's decision has been placed under seal, and grand jury proceedings are not available to the public. Earlier this year, he became one of Trump's point men to deal with the National Archives and the Justice Department when those agencies worked to get the classified paperwork returned from Trump. Trump has until next week to turn over records. According to the House January 6th Select Committee, the extension comes after Trump failed to turn over documents called for by a subpoena by Friday's deadline. The committee also said the former president is still under subpoena for the deposition testimony starting November 14th. The panel confirmed it has received correspondence from Trump about the subpoena, but didn't offer additional details. Reporting live from Franklin Hall Studio, I'm Jalen Bankston.
People across the state care about different issues when it comes to elections. What are the main issues that Portage County residents care the most about?
We have our very own Reggie English in Columbus to talk about tonight's election, what she will have to say coming up.
This show is sponsored by Portage Community Bank.
In our community, we take care of one another. When your dreams are big, we know it's important the advice is sound and decisions are made locally. When your time is of the essence, we understand you need life at your fingertips. When you invest in the future, we want your nearest and dearest to feel secure. We are neighbors serving neighbors. That's why you worry less and enjoy the everyday moments. Portage Community Bank. When you grow, we grow right along with you.
Tomorrow's news leaders.
Today's top stories.
From an award-winning student newsroom.
This is TV2 News, truly Portage County.
With many highly contested issues on the ballot, you may be wondering what Portage County considers to be the most important.
TV2's Troyano interviewed local residents to get the answer.
Originally a part of the Connecticut Western Reserve, Portage County includes people who've been there all their lives.
Moved to Freedom in 1940. I was like 2 years old when we moved to Freedom. You know, eventually I got married, but I always came back home.
And I've worked here since I was 12, so I've been here my whole life.
And according to them, they like the simple life.
It was all in one school. Our high school was all in one room.
And when Dollar General is my favorite little store now, I mean, it's right down the road and it has lots of good stuff.
And as they look toward the upcoming midterm election, they want that simplicity to stay.
I would like to see Freedom stay small. I wouldn't necessarily like to see some great big housing developments come in. That may be selfish on my part.
The majority of Portage County residents are focused on one thing this year: prices rising.
It starts to cause a lot more anxiety with people, how they're going to afford things, you know what I mean?
Why'd the pepperoni change? Well, you know, you have to go with what your supplier's giving you. I mean, I'm not going to travel to Cleveland to look for it. It's too far.
I found that as prices keep going up, it becomes a lot harder to live because the cost of living just keeps rising while the pay rate stays pretty stagnant.
And as midterms approach, some residents want their voices to be heard.
I definitely would say as we're coming out of the pandemic, seeing how people are readjusting to life, making sure that we stay on the right track, I would like to see them foster more of a communal ideal and bring people together.
I think the Ohio government's terrible because it's completely run by one party that doesn't care about humans. I hope
that something can get changed, but it's gerrymandered, so I don't know if it ever will.
And some have one final piece of advice.
We need to vote to keep a democracy, and that's important to me.
Reporting in Portage County for TV2 News, I'm Shane Troyano.
Schools across the country will be affected by the results of tonight's election in the coming years. At least 160 bills have been introduced in 35 states, targeting the rights of LGBTQ+ students' ability to participate in sports and attempting to ban LGBTQ topics from being taught in schools. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy has pledged to pass legislation on the federal level to ban transgender women from competing in women's sports, should Republicans take control of Congress. And now we've got a levy for the Waterloo School District, and that may determine the future for the school.
If the critical levy does not pass, the school district will face a $2.5 million deficit in the next 2 years. Our reporter Jack Berney has the story.
Voters in Atwater will see a familiar issue on the ballot this year, a proposed income tax levy for the Waterloo School District.
Issue 5 on the ballot is a 1.5% earned income tax. A school district has to pass levies to generate new money. And it's been about 10 years since we've generated any type of new money. So unfortunately, the district has had to cut some positions. So we're hoping to slowly rebuild some of those programs and bring some of those things back.
If the levy doesn't pass in November, the school district is looking at a $2.5 million deficit in 2 years, which could lead to less opportunities for the students of Waterloo. Despite this, some parents in the district are split on whether or not to vote for the levy. Kristen King moved to Randolph Township in 2020 and has a son who is a junior at Waterloo High School. She will not be voting for the levy, but admits she feels conflicted about her decision.
I don't want Waterloo to struggle. I don't want Waterloo to be at a deficit financially. But I don't want to have to pay an exorbitant amount of a levy tax.
Two other parents in the district, Rebecca Beckwith and Lizette Barton, are pro-levy. They both have young children in the school district and think this levy is crucial for the future of the school and the community.
I just couldn't imagine really voting no on a levy unless it was something really absurd. And none of these have been absurd. It's only grown because we can't get our stuff together.
And we all want our kids to grow up and go to this school together and have a good experience like we did. And I'm just worried that if we don't start appropriately taking action as a community, that they're not going to even have that opportunity to go to this school together. I fear if we can't pass a levy.
This is the 14th time the levy has been on the ballot in the last 6 years. Each time it's failed. Barton, who's been a member of this community her entire life, explains why she thinks that is.
I just think there's a real lack of support for education.
Last year, the levy failed by less than 200 votes. Superintendent Torrella's message to undecided voters on the issue.
I believe that a school can be the heartbeat of a community. We understand the ask, but school districts need to keep up with the times and the programming. And it's essential that we continue to offer our students the best solid curriculum that we can, so they can pursue goals after graduation.
Early voting in Ohio is up nearly 50% compared to the 2018 election. As of Tuesday, over 80,000 people voted early in person than in the last midterm election. Mail-in ballots also saw an 11% increase, although absentee mail-in ballot requests are down across the state. Ohio's increase in early voting numbers could possibly be due to early voter turnout in urban communities.
This midterm election in Ohio broke records with the number of early voters. More than 1.55 million Ohioans either voted early or requested an absentee ballot or for the midterm election, shared Ohio Secretary of State Frank LaRosa's office. This is an increase of 3.9% over 2018, which was also a record-setting year. These numbers came from Monday afternoon, and there are still many ballots that have not been received yet. Early and absentee voting is on the rise, and here in Kent, as well as with the record number of this year's in Portage County.
Our reporter Alexandria Manthey explains how early voting and mail-in ballots give students more flexibility to cast their vote.
Early and absentee voting has increased for the 2022 midterm elections.
Really, since absentee balloting started and absentee by mail started, it increases every year.
As of November 2nd, 4,137 people voted early in person. 13,700 absentee ballots were mailed by the Board of Elections, and 9,756 of those were returned.
You can go online and request an absentee ballot form, and you just fill it out of where you would like to vote from and where you want the absentee ballot sent to.
For students with busy schedules, absentee voting gives them the option to drop their ballot in the mail, or if they happen to be by their county's Board of Elections office, they can just drop it in the ballot box.
My Tuesdays are very booked compared to pretty much any other day of the week, and so I knew I couldn't do early voting Monday because I had classes today too as well. So I have to do it this weekend. So it was either absentee vote or just go in-person early vote.
I actually live 3 hours away from Kent in Urbana, Ohio, so I early voted in the fall break, just so I could vote for candidates who I've worked with for a really long time and impact my hometown.
Democratic officials came to campus the day before Election Day to encourage students to get out the vote.
You have to vote. There's no point in complaining about things if you don't take action.
It is really important for young people to vote. It matters. This election is one of the most, I think the most important in my lifetime and certainly in your all's, and you know, the future of Ohio is at stake here.
Alexandria, Manthey, TV2 News.
We have another update on votes thus far. Mike DeWine, 57.82% of the vote, over Nan Whaley, the Democratic candidate, 42.18% of those votes.
For Ohio Attorney General, we have Dave Yost at 51.6% and Jeffrey A. Crossman at 48.34%.
Ohio Auditor of State Keith Faber maintains his lead, 50.18% over Taylor Sappington, 49.82%.
For Ohio Secretary of State, Frank LaRose is at 51.33% and Chelsea Clark is at 51.33% as well. Tight race.
Ohio Treasurer of State Robert Sprague has 51.01% of the vote, and Scott Schertzer, that Democratic candidate, has 48.99% of that vote.
Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, we have Sharon L. Kennedy at 48.53% and Jennifer Brunner at 51.47%.
For Justice of the Supreme Court as well, Pat Fisher has 48.29% of the votes, and Terry Jamison has 51.71% of those votes.
In addition, we have Pat DeWine at 48.7% and Marilyn Zayas at 51.93%.
We're still keeping an eye on this U.S. Senator race. J.D. Vance has 47.21% of the votes, and Tim Ryan has 52.79% of the votes.
For Representative to Congress, we have Republican David P. Joyce at 44.72% and Matt Kilboy at 55.28%.
While a record number of students have registered to vote, many students will not actually cast their ballots. Why young people won't vote?
Atlanta is under fire after some issues with absentee ballots. What the elections director has to say about the missing ballots.
This show is sponsored by Portage Community Bank.
In our community, we take care of one another. When your dreams are big, we know it's important the advice is sound and decisions are made locally. When your time is of the essence, we understand you need life at your fingertips. When you invest in the future, we want your nearest and dearest to feel secure. We are neighbors serving neighbors. That's why you worry less and enjoy the everyday moments. Portage Community Bank. When you grow, we grow right along with you.